Hello, I'm Terrence McNally. Welcome to Free Forum, a world that just might work. I'm going to be speaking today with historian and author David Kaiser about his book, A Life in History, as well as his work looking at society through the lens of generations. And to learn more, you can go to his website, historyunfolding.com. The show airs as specials on KPFK 90.7 FM in Los Angeles, streams weekly on the Progressive Voices Network on TuneIn, and podcasts are available anytime, anywhere on Apple Podcasts, most major podcast sites, and at my site, terrencemcnally.net, TerrenceMcNally.net. I'm willing to bet that most, if not all of you listening right now, have either heard, read, or repeated the George Santayana quotation, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." Well, that line applies to today's conversation in at least a couple of different ways. Today's guest, David Kaiser, loves the study and the teaching of history. His latest book and first memoir tells the story of his life as an historian, beginning in second grade, and we'll talk about that, continuing through his undergraduate years at Harvard in the late 60s, and his 37 years of college teaching. It combines this personal narrative with his observations and commentary on changes in the historical profession, academia, as well as in American culture, politics, and society. The study and teaching of history has both broadened and narrowed. Fields like African American history, women's history, Native American history, and others have emerged and produced excellent and valuable work dealing with evidence nobody might have bothered to look at before. But according to Kaiser, as these new focused areas have developed, taking a broader approach to history has been reduced or eliminated, as was the study of politics, diplomacy, and wars. In his words, history education today need not include knowledge of great political events or the origins and consequences of wars. Kaiser points out that he's upset not about what's been added, but about what's been lost. The academic field of history has changed. More teachers, but narrower interests, attracting fewer students. Might this increase our tendency to repeat the past? And the other angle on history repeating. For the last 20 plus years, David has been seriously engaged with the work of William Straus and Neil Howe, whose books hold that progress is far from the sequential linear march of events that most assume, but is in fact cyclical. And they lay out a series of cycles from our nation's origins with 4 20-year generations each. And every 80 years or so, a crisis drastically disrupts society, the old order crumbles, and a new order emerges. And their last book, The Fourth Turning, subtitled An American Prophesy, predicts such a crisis beginning between 2005 and 2015, and one could say we are going through that crisis or emerging from that crisis right now. So, looking at their point of view, one might say that whether we remember history or not, we're bound at least to repeat its cycles. Anyone who listens regularly knows that I talk about something I call 60s 2.0, a multi-generational movement to develop and install that new order that follows that crisis, to act on the best of 60s values shared today, I believe, by millennials and younger generations, but helped by the possibility of exploiting new technologies of communication and organizing, tapping a much broader and deeper talent pool this time around, and combining the complementary resources of multiple generations to actually bring some of those values into society in a more sustainable and deeper way. David Kaiser taught history at Harvard, Carnegie Mellon, the Naval War College, and Williams College from 1976 through 2012. His 9 books include American Tragedy, Kennedy, Johnson, and the Origins of the Vietnam War, Politics and War, The Road to Dallas, a book on the Kennedy assassination, and his latest, the memoir, A Life in History. Welcome, David Kaiser, to Free Forum, a world that just might work.
Thank you very much, Terry. I certainly hope you Don't mind my calling you Terry. Since you did not mention it, I will mention it. That we met when we were both Harvard freshmen.
Absolutely.
We haven't been in frequent contact since then, but we have been in intermittent contact, and it's great to have this opportunity.
And I will share with people that in its own silly way, my most significant memory of you and I in our freshman year, and you know what I'm going to say, is
yes,
one day you walked up to me in the dining hall and you gave me as a gift an English pressing of the Beatles album Help.
Yes, right. My family was living in London at that time, and those versions had 2 extra tracks.
Right. Any responses to my introduction?
I thought it was excellent, really. The one other thing we might mention is that by another extraordinary coincidence, Bill Straus,
oh, that's right,
one of the co-authors of The Forced Turning, was also in our Harvard class, although I did not know him then and did not meet him actually until our 25th reunion.
So, okay, how did this book happen? 8 books that are not memoirs and then one that is. What goes into that decision?
Well, actually, this was my second pass at doing this. I got invited to go to Williams, as you remember, for the first time in 2007 by a political scientist named James McAllister, who had arranged for money to bring one historian a year to Williams to teach American foreign policy, because nobody in the history department was teaching American foreign policy anymore at that time. And this was the first time, really, since the 4 years I taught at Harvard in the late 70s, that I was going to be in the kind of institution I really wanted to be in. I knew it was going to be a big year for me, and I decided to do something that I had never done on a sustained basis, which was to keep a journal. And then I think when I got back to Jamestown in Rhode Island and my job at the War College, I put in some additional brief sections on the earlier stages of my career. And then I sent it to my agent at that time, and he said, why don't you wait and do a longer memoir later? So that's what I decided to do. And I don't know what decided me to get going exactly in 2016 or 2017, but I did. And I've been a pack rat all my life, and my mother was a pack rat, passed on a lot of memorabilia from my early years to me. I have almost every notebook from my years at Harvard, and so I had all the raw material I needed, and I got going on it. And I was also able to get about a dozen students to contribute to it. Now, alas, it turned out that this was not a marketable project. And none of the people who had published my previous books would even read it. They would just say, we don't do memoirs and we don't think there's a market for that. So I self-published it. But that turned out to be a lot of fun, and I learned a lot. And it's gotten a good deal of attention, and a lot of people have really liked it, and you can see that in the reviews on Amazon. So there's going to be more and more self-publishing, because the algorithms that agents and publishers are using now, and by that I don't mean that they're asking a computer what to publish, but just the algorithms they have in their head, are so restrictive that they are not allowing space for anything that's really original or anything that's really ambitious. And that really means that writing serious work is more and more going to become a hobby, I think, but it's a hobby I encourage people to pursue.
Yeah.
So that's how that got going.
Okay, so let's get to your life. First, quickly, the start of your career in second grade.
Yeah. Well, my childhood was very difficult for me, partly because we moved a lot. School was a refuge from the very beginning, and right from first grade onward, it seemed like I was the best reader in the class. And in second grade, I was reading a good deal at home. And then we had to move from suburban Maryland to the Albany area in the middle of the year. And I wasn't able to express what I was feeling at all, and I didn't get much help from my parents. But I got settled in second grade, and in the school library, I picked up a landmark book, which, as you probably remember, was a series of books about history for children.
Yeah.
Although some of them were written by very serious journalists and historians. And this one was called The Monitor and the Merrimack and Other Naval Battles. And I knew this was above second grade level, but I just started and read a few chapters, and I can remember thinking, boy, I can actually do this. And I read through it, and that kind of got me going. And another place, and this is not unique to me at all, I know several historians who could say the same thing. A lot of my original sense of history also came from the history of baseball, which I got obsessed with early in life, and that has led to 2 different books as well.
Let's move up now to your undergraduate years. Did you arrive at college knowing what you wanted to do, knowing what you wanted to do in college and perhaps after?
Not that much. I was just so happy to get there. Again, my family had kept dragging me around the country and around the world. I think I figured out that in my 12 years of primary and secondary schooling, I was in 7 different schools. And this had culminated in 2 years at boarding school in Connecticut. And going to Harvard, this was the first time I had picked where I was going. That meant a lot to me. It did turn out to be a good fit. I met a lot of people I really liked right off the bat. I had a lot of unfinished business emotionally, which held me back in some ways. But I knew that I was interested in history. I took history. I took a history course the first term. I also took Economics 1. In that Economics 1 class was another young man from Washington named Al Gore.
Yeah.
I had met his father, so I knew who he was. He was very quiet that whole year in that class. But anyway, the section man really took a liking to me and tried to talk me into doing economics, but I didn't. So I knew I was in history then. Now, I really can't remember when I started thinking seriously about being an academic. It wasn't the first couple of years in college, and then the last couple of years in college, as you remember very well, you couldn't really have thoughts like that because your main focus had to be on how you were going to handle your obligation to Uncle Sam. And there wasn't any opportunity to go right to grad school, even if that was what you wanted to do. But I think by the time I graduated, although I couldn't do anything about it then, I knew that was what I wanted to do. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, let me, I mean, because we have this, these these intersecting parallel lives, let me just say, my parents drove. I also changed schools every 2 years as a kid. My dad worked.
I didn't know that.
My dad worked for the government and the VA, and to get a promotion, you basically had to move.
Oh boy!
Instead of the competing guys at your level, one of them moving up, you would move. So I changed every couple of years, and also skipped 4th grade, which was traumatic. So I had, we had some similar things going on that way. I remember that my parents drove me up to school because I'd been born in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and they figured they'll drive me up to school and go visit family. And I looked at the course catalog on the drive up, and I found that what I was most interested in was things about people, and I ended up taking SocRel, Social Relations 10 as a freshman, and ending up being a social relations major. But it really came from just noticing what sort of piqued my interest on that drive.
Since that has come up, did you ever take Pettigrew's course on race relations?
I absolutely did.
Wasn't that an amazing experience?
Listen, I so agree with your, nostalgia is a lame word for your feeling about your undergraduate education, but it is also mine. Yep. I took Tom Pettigrew. I took Rawls' course on ethics. I took I took Kohlberg's course on moral development. Talcott Parsons on sociology. It was phenomenal, and I was really into it. And the other thing I did want to mention was that I had football injuries by the time I got to college, and pretty much knew. I also tore my knee playing intramurals freshman and sophomore year, and so pretty much knew that I was going to be 1Y or 4F, and so I didn't.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I was not as preoccupied with that as most were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And also took EC1, which I remember met at 8 a.m., which I thought was cruel and unusual. If you're teaching economics to freshmen, doing it at 8 a.m. is really not helpful.
That must have been your section, because I'm sure mine did not meet at 8 a.m.
Okay. It was brutal. It was brutal.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Quick question. What did
Yeah.
you learn in your 4 months of active duty in the military?
That was a remarkable experience for me. I learned a lot about myself. Now, remember, I joined the reserves after some other strategies had failed. I can remember the exact date, on September 20th, 1970, which was also the night of the first regular Monday Night Football game, actually. Yeah. I went to basic training in early April of 1971 at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. So we're talking exactly 50 years ago, and in fact, we're coming up to the anniversary of my getting out of basic training in the next few days. I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was the first week in August. And that led, I went right from that to what could be called a Swedish honeymoon with the woman who became my first wife and remained my wife for 25 years, but that's in the past now. But anyway, now, in the circles I was moving in, the Army was not popular, the war was not popular. Now, I was not endangered, and the people around me were not endangered. That is, the war had really wound down. Mm-hmm. I was only in the reserves anyway, and half the company was made up of National Guards and reservists. But even the other half, even the draftees, the drill sergeants would tell them, don't worry if you get called for infantry, because you won't be going to Vietnam, you'll be going to Germany. If you're a clerk, you might be going to Vietnam. And thus, this was not a tense wartime atmosphere at that point. Now, one of the things about me, which, again, is very different from the rest of my family, I have to say, and I don't know where it came from, is that I'm very rules conscious and fairness conscious, and really, I just want to be treated like everybody else. And the Army really appealed to me for that reason, and being on a footing of equality with all these guys from very different backgrounds. I mean, there were plenty of college-educated people in my unit, but there were a lot of urban blacks and rednecks as well. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the physical exercise part of it. I enjoyed shooting the M16, and I turned out to be very good about it, more or less to my surprise. All that was in basic training. The second half of it was just a bore. But I really did learn a lot about myself, and it made me comfortable in a certain kind of environment. And that was one reason why, when things had gone sour at Carnegie Mellon and I got the chance to go to the Naval War College, I didn't hesitate, because I knew that kind of environment, and I knew that was going to be no problem for me at all, quite the contrary.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Also, your early work on the Monitor and the Merrimack had prepared you for the
sure.
Naval work.
Well, and I'd read, and then the next big phase in my development as a historian, which I mentioned, which was in 5th grade, was when I read This Hallowed Ground by Bruce Catton, which was the first really adult work of history I'd read, which was a whole history of the Civil War from the Northern viewpoint, and that led to an obsession with the Civil War that lasted for a few years. And so that was another big step.
Yeah. I skipped over, and because we're going to talk about it in comparison, what do you appreciate most, looking back, about your undergraduate education? And specifically your work on history?
Well, what I appreciate most about the undergraduate education was not so much what I learned specifically, but the kind of spirit of it, which I'm sure you will remember as well. It was very challenging in humanities and social science. We had very long reading lists.
Oh my God, yes.
Yes, but the wonderful thing about it, Terry, was you didn't have to get an A. I mean, I have the figures on the grade distribution in the book. I'm not going to take the time to open it up. But I think it was only 15 or 20% of grades being handed out at that point were A's or A minuses. And a B was a very solid accomplishment and a good grade, exactly. Whereas nowadays, a B is a disgrace, the end of your life, you'll never make it to Harvard Business School or law school or whatever, and that's very sad. So that's what I appreciated the most, and people took things that they knew they had no chance of getting an A in just because they'd heard they were great courses.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing you mentioned in the book is the earlier Harvard president Conant, who had put in general education so that it was considered not just okay, but recommended that you get a general, broad education. And I know you did that, and I did that, and you know, I just if people aren't getting that experience today, I really, you know, I feel for them.
Yeah, but in addition, as I mentioned, Conant actually hired several distinguished scholars from outside the university to teach Gen Ed.
Yes.
And David Reisman, the most notable one, but there were others. And that never happens anymore. And that was one of the great frustrations of my career on the job market. And the professors who were stars in Gen Ed were the stars of the university.
Yes.
To an extraordinary extent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as you point out, Nobel Prize winner George Wald taught the general ed science course in chemistry. You know, that was kind of thing. So you stuck around Harvard for grad school, and by that I say stuck around. This is after your military experience, and you focused on modern European history. Why that focus, and would you be likely to do so or be able to do so if you were entering grad school this fall?
Well, I did. I had gravitated towards European and especially English history in college. I was actually amazingly ignorant about certain aspects of European history, even when I finished college. For instance, I couldn't have given you a capsule summary of the career of Otto von Bismarck, for instance, on the day I graduated from college, but I learned a lot more in grad school. I had gotten very interested in diplomacy and the origins of wars, and the best history courses I had taken in college were about that. And that's what I was going to do. Now, could you go to grad school now and focus on the origins of European war? I think the answer is almost surely no. That field appears to me to be almost dead. You could go and still do American foreign relations, although apparently you would be under considerable pressure to do it in a completely non-traditional way. That was already happening in the years before I retired in 2013, and I'm sure it's still happening now. But you wouldn't come out of college with the background that I had either, which was, again, there were two big issues in the history department and also in the government department, which was really an alternative history department at Harvard at that time. One was the whole relationship between the state and society and the economy, including the various revolutionary movements that had sprung up in the last century. And the other was the relations among states and how wars came about and their consequences and so on. And that was what I was really exposed to. The other wonderful thing I was exposed to at Harvard as an undergrad that became part of my intellectual equipment was going on at what became the Kennedy School, a new way to look at how governments work and to trace where policy comes from. That tells you to look at the policy process, look at the bureaucracies that are involved, and see how they shape it. Now, again, I think it's very unlikely that anybody could go to college today and specialize in those kinds of areas.
Mm-hmm. Let me tell people, by the way, this is Free Forum, a world that just might work. I'm Terrence McNally. I'm speaking with historian and author David Kaiser about his book, a memoir with observations far afield from his own personal life called A Life in History. And we're also planning to talk about his work looking at society through the lens of generations. To learn more, you can go to it's a blog site, and he puts out something new just about every week. It's History Unfolding, one word, historyunfolding.com. Okay, so you taught at Harvard for 4 years and left after 4, and I'm not going to deal with your other books because of time.
Okay. Sure.
But we're going to deal with this career. So you taught at Harvard. What was that like, and why did you end up leaving after 4 years?
Well, I didn't have much choice. I could have stayed one more year.
Yeah.
Well, the job market had suddenly become very tight. The golden age of the job market in the humanities was in the 50s and the early 60s, in which hundreds of historians, literary scholars, whatnot, from the silent generation, born roughly from 1925 to 1942, went through graduate school, and they were hired to teach us, to teach the boom generation.
Right.
And to staff the huge expansion of higher education at that time. Now, these guys, many of them were only 10 years older than we were, and the boom was over by the late 60s, and it was going to be very difficult to find a job. Also, I had written a very ambitious dissertation, covered a lot of ground. I thought that was going to be my selling point.
Right.
As it turned out, it didn't help at all, and that motif followed me through the rest of my career as I continued to broaden out my interests. But we don't need to go on about that now. Plus, my appointment triggered something of a departmental fight. People had their own ambitions. All of this is described in excruciating detail in the book, but I'm not going to mention any names or going into any detail about that now. As it turned out, I did get a 3-year appointment after 2 one-year appointments. This was a high-stress time in my life in other ways. My wife was having her first child. But anyway, however, by the last 2 years, I was really one of the most popular lecturers in the college. And by the last time I taught my big lecture course on international politics from 1870 to 1970, it had 100 people in it, and it would have had more. That was an awfully intense experience. But I was turned down for promotion, not to tenure, but to tenured associate. And I could have stayed 1 more year. But I did get the opportunity to go to Carnegie Mellon, which is the only opportunity I had if I wanted to stay in academia, which I certainly did.
Now, let's be clear. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah.
So you've had a good career as an undergraduate. You've done a respected thesis. You've taught for 4 years. You've gotten good ratings from students, etc. You're doing everything right, and you say Carnegie Mellon was the one place you could get a job.
Yes. There weren't many jobs. I don't think I ever applied for a single job that actually called for European diplomacy, which was my technical specialty.
So no one was looking for what your specialty was.
No. Yeah. Now again, you see, my thesis involved Britain, France, and Germany, and I had done France and Germany in my general exam. I knew I could teach French history or German history, and I applied to a lot of jobs for French and German history, and I could never get through the door on that because this is the way academia works. Every job has a narrow description, and they will always prefer someone who fits it narrowly to someone who could not only do what this asks for, but who could do other things as well. That's crazy, but that's the way it is.
Yeah, no, I get it. As you say it, as I've heard you say, if you can do X and someone else can do X and Y, they'll choose the one who can only do X.
Exactly.
And listen, let me just share with you that I, of
Sure.
course, since my education as an adult has been doing these interviews now for nearly 25 years, I am a generalist. It's one of the
Right.
reasons that I started doing this.
Right.
And, and everything you say about how the world and the job markets especially conspire against generalists or people with broad interests or people with intersecting interests, I so get that.
Yeah.
And I will share one other thing, which is that from 2001 to 2015, I was a panelist every year at the Conference on World Affairs at the University of Colorado in Boulder. I would imagine you know people who've done that gig.
I don't, actually. I may, but I'm not aware of it. Let's put it that way. I probably do know some people.
Oh, I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do.
It never came up.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But you would have loved it.
Yeah.
You did panels, about 8 of them a week. It was a 5-day thing. 8, 9, 10. Some would be in your sweet spot. Some would be completely far afield because you're only talking for about 10 minutes and then taking Q&A with other panelists, right? And it turned out for me, it was like it was just perfect. And speaking to rooms and often actually, David, halls and auditoriums full of students and citizens and Boulder citizens and Colorado citizens, and expected to be knowledgeable but not academic, wide open Q&A, receptions every night with the fellow panelists, many of the brightest people I know. And one thing that happened as I got about 5 or 6 years into that was I thought, I missed it by not going into academia. And I started.
Oh, no, you didn't.
That's what people told me. Exactly. I started researching it and asking, because a lot of the panelists were, professors and authors like yourself at the time. And boy, they said, this is not what it's like. This is not at all what it's like. And as you point out at one point, that teaching has no currency in the job market for a university professor.
No, not at all. No.
I mean, talk just a bit about that, because that may be new information to a lot of people.
Well, that was already happening when we were in college.
Yeah.
And professors who took their teaching seriously were regarded as a little weird. But it's gotten much worse. And I think the dreadful thing about it is that actually the qualities you need to be a good teacher are, in fact, the same qualities that allow you to write a great book, because you have to be able to convey a lot of information in a concise manner and in an interesting manner. But, I mean, there were some cases, one of them turned out rather ironically, I won't go into the details, of very popular and brilliant assistant professors who got turned down for tenure while we were there. Although the one I'm thinking of, who I had in the class, the way his career turned out wasn't very inspiring to me, but that's another story.
Okay.
Anyway, it's still that way. The Harvard government department, I read recently, because I still look at the Crimson a lot, God help me. It usually just depresses me, but I do it. They cut back the teaching load from 4 courses to 3, and that includes graduate teaching, which doesn't take much time.
Right.
Because they thought they had to do that to attract the people they wanted and so on. And there's nobody riding herd on the educational experience at Harvard or at most colleges and universities anymore. It's totally decentralized, and there's no plan. And I really feel sorry for the kids who are there today. But no, teaching is looked down on. And now a lot of this, let's get to this right now.
Yeah.
This is in the book, and you'll remember it. One of my best friends in the profession, although I haven't talked to him lately, is Robert Dallek, who's maybe 10 years older than we are. And he's very prolific. He wrote a great biography of Kennedy. He wrote a biography of LBJ. Actually, recently, he wrote a 600 or 800 page biography of FDR, and I got to read some of it. It was very good. And he's a very lovely, nice, low-key guy. And I met him at the archives in Washington, got to know him very well. And maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I was on the phone with him. And I said, Bob, I finally figured out what's wrong with our profession. There's so few of us who really enjoy it.
Ah, yes.
And without missing a beat, he said, you are so right. And then he mentioned, and what do you think of the ones who become administrators? And I said, I know exactly what you mean. It's like saying my whole life has been a terrible mistake. And I still feel that way. That's one of the things I'm really proud of, by the way. I had a definite ambition never to become department chairman, and I was completely successful in that ambition.
Yes.
I'm glad to say.
And the other
I
thing
didn't want
that
to
I
be
would
promoted to my level of incompetence. Yeah.
Yeah. Your book includes the reminiscences of a dozen of your students. I would
That's
think
right.
most or many would be hard-pressed to be in touch with a dozen of their students.
That's probably true. And some of those people I had not been in touch with for a long time. Well, actually, one of them, this is really amazing. Her name is Claire McHugh. She's a journalist. And she was a freshman in 1979-80, and she and her roommate sat in the front row of my lecture course. And she knew some students who I knew better, but this is not someone who I think I ever had a conversation with in my office or ever had lunch with in the dining hall or anything like that. I mean, I knew she was, but I wasn't at all close to her. And I had never been in touch with her again. And I was doing some blogging at that point. I still could, but it lapsed for a while, with Time Life. And the young woman who was my editor there suddenly said to me, this was maybe 5 years ago, you know, I worked with somebody who was a student of yours at Harvard, and she still remembers your course very well.
Oh.
Her name was Claire McHugh, and I was absolutely flabbergasted. But she's become a good friend since then. So, yeah, that was a great source of satisfaction, and it has continued to be so. There were some students, particularly from Harvard, but not only from Harvard, who I have remained in touch with more, let's say, continually since then. But some of those I had not. There was also, there were a couple of people who I really hoped would contribute, who I had not seen in forever. And I tracked them down, but for whatever reason, they did not want to. But that's the way it goes. Anyway,
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to skip through the story part and go to one last question on teaching of history, and then we'll switch to the generations and the Straus and Howe work. You ended up teaching Carnegie Mellon, I think, 8 years and
10 years.
10 years, and it was what you say is that it was not a university you would have wanted to go to for history. You might have loved going there for engineering, but not necessarily.
I've been an engineer. Yeah.
Yes, no, that's what I mean. It's
Right.
it's a great school, and it actually has a great theater department.
It does, yeah.
But not, and then you ended up at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, where you taught for 22 years, which would have, I think, totally surprised you. And then you've had experiences, a couple of years teaching at Williams College. But in a talk that I watched on video, and I'm going to quote you, you raised this question. Why was it that with all my intense lifelong interest in history, all I've managed to achieve in the classroom and in print, as I said, 8 books before this one, that it turned out to be miraculous that I even had a career as a historian at all, and that I was unable to secure the kind of permanent position I wanted at any of the 30 or so elite institutions where I would have been delighted to work? And your answer is?
The way times have changed, the way the job market works, which we've already talked about.
Yep.
That narrow is preferred to broad. Some of it was just bad luck. It could be that it might have all been different, actually, if I'd had a higher draft number and been able to go to grad school a year earlier. But we'll never know. So it's all those things. Now, I have to say, though, okay, the War College, as I say in the book, in a lot of ways, intellectually, it was a very good fit. Mm-hmm. Because to teach strategy and policy from the Greeks to the present, which is what we did, in my department, you had to know a lot about a great many things, and that was me. So that was very good, and you had to think big. So that was good, and now the curriculum was made up of certain things that I was very interested in. Not everything, but certain things. So that was fine. And the books that I wrote there, 2 of the 3 anyway, American Tragedy and then No One Save Victory, about the origins of the Second World War, those fit very much into that curriculum, and they benefited from that environment very much. Now, frankly, though, here's the thing. I mean, I could still be teaching in college. I would still love to be teaching 1 course a year. When I first retired and came here to Watertown, I put out some feelers, tried to find somewhere. I got absolutely nowhere, and I gave up. I am about to teach older people in another environment this fall, but that's another story altogether. I would still love to work with young people, but frankly, and I left the War College when I did, partly because you had to do the same thing every year. I'd been doing it for over 20 years, and really there was, and things were deteriorating there in some ways too, also. But it was time for a change, and I desperately wanted to get back into the Boston, Cambridge area, and we did, and that's great. Yeah. So I noticed, by the way, Terry, at the reunion, the last one in particular, the last 2, when somebody asks me, where do you live now, I'm so delighted to tell them. It's very interesting that it's right down the street in Watertown. Yeah. But anyway, I might be having a very tough time if I was still involved in a college or university right now. Because the climate has gotten so ideological in ways that I'm not sympathetic with at all. And I really don't know how that would go for me at this point.
Yeah. I know one thing that I have thought to myself is that, and I've expressed this, I think, in at least one forum where you were, which is that I am so glad that I was young when I was young. I would not do well.
Oh, yes. Oh, God.
I would not do well in a college campus nowadays where speech is circumscribed and you know, you can't step on a crack in the sidewalk, if you get what I mean.
I know.
Yeah, and I was ours was a time of openness. Throw it out there. Try it. You know, it's just. I mean, and that played so to, again, who I am. Let's switch. I think people have gotten the notion of what we know of what you have to say about what has happened to college in the narrowness and the wokeness and all of those sorts of things. Let's talk about the work of Bill Straus and Neil Howe. How did you discover it? How would you describe it? And why has it resonated so deeply with you?
Okay, the first book was Generations, which I think came out in 1991. And the library at the War College, which was a small library but strong in military history, obviously, they had bought a copy, and I saw it on the new bookshelf for must have been a couple of years, but I didn't pick it up. And then came the 25th reunion, and somehow I got started talking to Bill Straus, and he sketched out what they had done, and it was a very interesting conversation. And so I got back, and that was enough for me to take Generations off the shelf and start to read it. And I got so excited that for a whole week I could hardly sleep.
Oh, that's great.
I mean, I've been an insomniac most of my adult life anyway, to some extent, but this was different. It was just too exciting. Because they had discovered this 80-year cycle in American history with the great crisis every 80 years. They found one in the 17th century. I won't go into that in detail. King Philip's War and the Glorious Revolution. Then there's the American Revolution and the Constitution. Then 80 years later, there's the Civil War. Then 80 years later, there's the Depression and the Second World War. And then they did the math. And they said sometime in the first 15 years or so of the 21st century, we're going to be in another great crisis again. And so then, after reading it, I called Bill Straus, and this sort of set the tone for our relationship. And I sort of said hello, reminded him who I was.
Yeah.
I've been reading your book, and I said, I don't think you got the boundary for the GI generation quite right. I said, and he responded to that in kind, and we were off and running. Now, it so happened that The Fourth Turning, the second book, which you've read now, was about to come out at that point. It came out a few months later, actually, and I was able to review it in the Boston Globe. And then they also started a website, which no longer exists, which was a forum to discuss the issues in The Fourth Turning. And that attracted an extraordinarily eclectic group of people around the country. And it was like a wonderful academic journal, really, for a few years. It eventually deteriorated in the flame wars, and now it survives in a different form in Facebook. But I love, it also identified the types of generations. It enables you to place yourself. It enables you to place your parents and your kids. And actually, that was one reason I was so taken with it, because I have two sons who are respectively a very late wave Xer and a leading edge millennial. And they both fit the stereotypes, the archetypes very well that they described, and they still do to this day, really. And that was another thing that caught my eye. And also, it got me thinking about movies in a different way, and I created this course, which I'm still teaching when I can, at the War College, called Generations in Film. But then I built their model into American tragedy, which is really the tragedy of the GI generation, our parents' generation, leading us into Vietnam. And I built it in No End Save Victory. And like everybody else who read those books, I was watching for the crisis to start and looking forward to what they called the great regeneracy in American life. Now, the tragedy, as I see it now, is that they were right that the crisis was going to come along, but they were wrong in that they thought that our generation was going to produce a Lincoln or a Franklin Roosevelt that would really get the country on a new path and create a new kind of consensus and lead us into a new era. And that we have been unable to do. And
let me just help listeners for a second.
Yes.
The Fourth Turning is written in 1997.
That's right.
So you figure it's the late years of Clinton and Gore.
Yep.
It precedes the 2000 election, which you believe is the start of the crisis. And just imagine how their predictions would look had the Supreme Court not taken that election from Al Gore. I'm not sure what would have happened, but I think that pivot point is critical. But soon after, the Supreme Court takes the election from Al Gore. Within a year, there's the terrorist attack. We're now in the Mideastern wars. And basically, you end up saying that the transformational leader that they expected turns out to be George W. Bush. And I almost can't help but read that by saying, well, what you really mean is Dick Cheney. Pick up the ball.
Well, it's both of them, yes. Now, what's interesting about this is, I'm sure George W. Bush, well, let's put it this way. I'd be very surprised if George W. Bush had read The Fourth Turning.
Yeah.
Okay? I don't think it's... However, I would be very surprised if Karl Rove had not read it. Okay?
Yeah.
And when 9/11 happened, they did seize upon it as a cause to rally the country around, to turn the Republican Party into the savior of the country against the Democrats, and to launch this great international crusade. And meanwhile, they were taking some huge steps domestically having to do with energy that really stayed under the radar. And they did get the country behind them as we marched off to bring democracy to the Middle East. And it's really shocking, too, in retrospect. I'm sure you remember this, Terry, how many leading Democrats, of course, most of them signed on to the war in Iraq right away.
Yeah.
And I was corresponding with somebody, he's a retired Foreign Service officer, who was in my department at Newport, and he remembers a department meeting that I don't remember in early 2003, in which there were 3 people in the meeting who were expressing grave reservations about Iraq, and he and I were 2 of them, but everybody else was on board, or at least didn't say anything.
Yeah.
Now, this is the thing, okay? In 1775-6, we set off on a revolution, and it's successful, and we write a constitution, and it works. In 1861, Lincoln starts out the Civil War, and 4 years later, the North has won it, and the Union is preserved, and slavery is abolished, and the Republicans are in charge for a long time. FDR copes fairly successfully with the Depression, lays the foundation for the middle class, really, in a lot of ways, and wins the Second World War, okay, and creates the consensus era that we've grown up in. But Bush just led us into disaster, and none of it has worked. And very little the government has tried to do has worked, so that we don't have the new consensus. We have worse division than ever. Now Trump, to me, represented the collapse of our political system, simply because neither party could produce a candidate who could beat him in 2016.
Yeah.
And that really showed that the system as we had known it was kaput. Now, the country, which does move during this crisis in big emotional swings, back and forth, okay? And it's had another big emotional swing back toward the Democrats. But Biden is really struggling to make a lot happen, and it certainly doesn't look as if he's going to create, a 55% majority, shall we say, for himself or his successor 3 years down the road. And I'm even, I wouldn't be that surprised at this point if some Republican didn't win in 2024, although that's a long way off and we can't make any predictions. So, unfortunately, we're running a very frightening experiment now, looking at it from the point of view of Straus Howe's model. What happens when you don't have a successful crisis, or fourth turning as they call it, that creates this new consensus? And where does the country go after that? Now, I can tell you that Bill talked a lot in the years before his death about the possibility that the country might break up.
Yes.
And he even wrote a novel based on that scenario. It was the aftermath of the breakup. I'm sorry to say I never read it, and nobody seems to have a copy nowadays. It was never published. But I don't rule out that possibility, and the polls that are being taken about that possibility. But let me go to one other thing, okay?
And we've got to close now and just let this be a teaser for listeners.
All right, fine. But I do want to say this is the most depressing thing to me. In the classic fourth turning, the Revolution, the Civil War, Second World War, sure, there are malcontents and it's difficult, but the country pulls together and does what has to be done. And our experience with the pandemic shows, alas, that we really don't seem to have the capacity to do that anymore. And that's very depressing. And really, I really wonder if we could cope with something considerably more serious, as we may have to do.
In terms of climate change or something else.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, we've got to let this be a teaser for listeners. The Fourth Turning is that book. There's a Facebook page and so on. But this is interesting stuff. And I just go back to, you mentioned that you think Karl Rove must have read it. We know Steve Bannon read it.
Steve Bannon interviewed me about it.
Oh, my.
In around 2009, yes. Yeah, that's right.
And you didn't know who Steve Bannon was then, yes.
No, I want to say, too, that he was a very different person at that moment than the Steve Bannon we have come to know since then.
But I just recall the last words of his interview with Charlie Rose a few years back. He said, "There will be a populist revolution The question is, will it be from the left or the right?
Yeah.
I also think that you placing the origin of this crisis in the aftermath of the 2000 election makes very good sense to me. We had been moving toward minority rule, but that to me is the pivot point toward minority rule. And I believe that when you take minority rule and you add social media and the algorithms that lead us to division, it's a bit unprecedented, and thus is why it's messing with their cycles.
Well, let me say, though, that the guilt is on both sides, even in 2000. Yes, the Republicans decided to steal the election, and the best evidence shows that they did. But Al Gore should have gotten up and said, which he did not say, there's only one thing to do. We have to recount every single ballot in the state of Florida.
Of course.
And he didn't do that.
Nope.
And that hurt him a lot.
Yep.
So I was really shocked at the lack of commitment to our civic process that came out in that crisis, and we paid for it.
Yep. And as we know, through gerrymandering and many other things, I believe, and just the constitutional pathways that were laid out, we are now in a period of minority rule, and I think it does not solve problems. And it does not inspire the nation. When I am saying minority rule, it breeds cynicism. I agree that we are in big trouble, and that the only way for Biden and the Democrats to win in 2022 and 2024 is to deliver. And the question of whether they'll be able to deliver enough that energizes people, given the obstruction of minority rule, I think is the question we face. I've got to let you go.
Well, thank you so much, Terry. This has been great.
Yeah. The book is A Life in History. The websites are History Unfolding, one word, historyunfolding.com, and alifeinhistory.com takes you directly toward the book. For this conversation and many other interviews and articles, to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, go to TerrenceMcNally.net. TerrenceMcNally.net, or aworldthatjustmightwork.com. They're the same website. If you want to receive my weekly email announcement on who's going to be on, what we're going to talk about, and usually 8 or 10 articles, timely and relevant to the conversation, sign up at my site or email me at temcnally@mac.com. You can also subscribe and listen to the Freeform podcast on Apple Podcasts, at other podcast sites, at my site, and so on. And you'll find years of podcasts at Apple, at Podomatic, at my site. You can follow me on Twitter, at McNally Terrence. Thanks to G in Production, George Vasilopoulos at Progressive Voices, and most of all, you, my listeners, please share this podcast widely. And thank you, David Kaiser. Keep up your good work.
Thank you, Terry. I will do my best. And you too.